So this is a little bit of an on-the-fly change. Eddie and I had set up this part 2 of our practical strategies for expanding your ePortfolio work. And unfortunately, Eddie is sick today. He was sick yesterday, and I think he's worse today. And he did tell me that his voice is completely gone. So I have had to keep in the spirit of what we were doing, but kind of made some modifications to what we had planned. So this is part 2. We did a session, I think it was back in March, part 1, which was about piloting an ePortfolio initiative and the things you should pay attention to. And that went very well. And we're doing this part 2, which is moving from pilot to scale. And I'm David Hubert, Associate Provost for Learning Advancement at Salt Lake Community College. And I'll tell you our story of ePortfolio moving to scale in a little bit. And if I can advance the slides. Did that advance the slide? Can someone tell me if that advanced the slide?
It advanced the slide.
Okay, it looks like I have to do it manually. So just recalling the part 1 of our practical strategies series, we talked about some of the following key topics: establishing a justification for your pilot and articulating a vision for it, choosing the pilot participants, right? Do you want just kind of early adopter folks in there, or do you want to be more strategic about who you wanted to be involved in your pilot? Choosing a platform or possibly platforms to use in your pilot, connecting with allies who can help your pilot succeed, locating resources, which is always important, and gathering data from the pilot so that you can decide whether or not to move forward. And of course, some of these things, especially locating resources and gathering data, are going to be important as you move from pilot to scale as well. So these are the key topics that we want to think about as we move from a pilot initiative to something more broadly implemented at your institution or in your department. First of all, leadership. Think about who is going to be the point person or persons with respect to your ePortfolio initiative. Is it going to be one person? Is it going to be a committee? But you really need to think about who's going to answer the phone. It's almost like the Ghostbusters, right? Who is somebody going to call on your campus if they want to know about ePortfolio? And who's going to pick up that phone? Who's going to be responsible for budgets? Who's going to be making decisions? And so this might be a combination of an individual person along with a supporting committee or a department, something along those lines. In terms of resources, you want to think about the typical kinds of things you'll need to get an initiative to go to scale. Money is obviously an important resource. So budget, whether that's one-time budget or base budget that will go from year to year. Staff who can dedicate at least part of their time to the initiative. Space is obviously important as well, to house those folks and maybe to set up some support labs. Curricular and co-curricular anchors. When and where are students going to touch the ePortfolio? So in terms of curricular anchors, we're really typically talking about what courses or programs the ePortfolio is embedded in, where will students be asked to interact with it? And in terms of co-curricular anchors outside of academic programs, where will students be interacting with the ePortfolio? In terms of pedagogy, I think of pedagogy as a continuum from a completely laissez-faire approach on the one hand, all the way to a pretty tightly mandated set of moves that faculty and students will make with an ePortfolio, and then of course everything in between. And you'll want to think about ePortfolio pedagogy as you move forward. Support systems are vitally important. ePortfolios are often a new an unknown thing for students. They have a hard time imagining what you mean by an e-portfolio. And the same thing goes for faculty as well. Many of them, when we first introduced e-portfolios, thought of them as sort of some sort of database in the sky. And we were thinking of them in an entirely different way from that. So you need a support system that can help faculty and students realize your vision for your ePortfolio implementation. Think about assessment, how ePortfolio is going to be used to assess an academic program, for instance, and how you're going to assess the effectiveness of your ePortfolio implementation. Professional development is vital and needs to be in place before you reach scale, so that faculty and staff who are using your ePortfolio are up to speed on it, know what the expectations are, and know how to make the most use out of the platform that you've chosen. Data collection obviously is important. You want to keep collecting data on your initiative to see how it's doing and to show that progress that you are making. And then finally, synergies and partnerships. So the last thing you want for an ePortfolio initiative is for it to be out there on its own. You want it connected with other sympathetic departments and processes on your campus. So at this point, Eddie was going to tell the story of ePortfolio implementation at Virginia Tech, and unfortunately we can't benefit from that experience today, so we will skip that. But I will tell the story at Salt Lake Community College, and I've added a little picture there. That's roughly the view from my office. It kind of looks like that, only we have no snow left anymore, and it's going to be a long, hot rest of the summer. I've also put the URL for our student resource site on our college webpage. And this has been created by our ePortfolio coordinator, Emily Dibble, and ePortfolio specialist, Victoria Harding. And this is just a tremendous resource. There's also links from there to our faculty resources. And we believe in the CASE method, copy and steal everything. So everything we've put up on there, from rubrics to examples to ideas, feel free to use at your institution. So let me tell you a little bit about the story of ePortfolio at SLCC, kind of as quickly as I can, but try to cover some of these key topics. We came to ePortfolio through a carrot and a stick. Basically, the stick was that our accrediting body said that we did no real assessment of our general education program. And the carrot was that we were concerned that our gen ed program was not very integrated and meaningful for students. It was kind of a menu-driven situation where students are just taking one unrelated class after another. So we were really interested in pursuing that carrot of integration and meaningfulness in our general education program, while at the same time dealing with the threat from our accreditor, which was that we were not assessing general education. And through fits and starts, we hit on the idea that ePortfolio and reflective ePortfolio with signature assignments could address both of those issues. So we got a small grant and began piloting ePortfolios. I was one of the initial piloters. About 15 faculty were involved across different disciplines. And we did that for 3 years. And each of us chose our own platform that we wanted to play with. And this was only at our individual course level. But we gained a lot of experience from that. And we learned from other institutions like LaGuardia Community College, which was a bit ahead of us in ePortfolio implementation. And finally, we reached a point where we wanted to move from pilot to a larger scale. And we had a debate about whether to go small and try to start ePortfolio in a couple of programs or departments and then grow them from there, or to go big off the bat. And we eventually decided to go big off the bat. And we decided to put a proposal forward to put ePortfolio as a required pedagogy in all of our general education courses. And this was debated for about 18 months. It was passed by 3 different faculty committees, including the Faculty Senate, as well as by the Student Senate. And so we have our anchors automatically, right? Our general education program for associate's degrees is about 12 courses that students need to take. So in each of those 12 courses, students are going to encounter the ePortfolio. Later, we expanded it. So now all of our service learning courses use ePortfolio, regardless of whether they are general education or not. All of our civically engaged scholars use ePortfolio. Some of our clubs use ePortfolio. Our study abroad program uses ePortfolio. And some of our other programs like occupational therapy assistant or dental hygiene, they use ePortfolio in a program specific context. So we started with a fairly large set of anchors and we're growing it over time. Support systems was an important consideration, but at the beginning, we didn't really have any resources. So I was the initial support system. I moved my office from where it was into the library. I had a friend who was the dean of the library. She gave me a space where I could set up a makeshift ePortfolio lab. I set up the initial support sites. I set up all of the video tutorials, and I met with students, on a drop-in basis in that space. Fortunately, about 6 months after we got started, I was able to hire an ePortfolio coordinator, and that was Katie Lewis, and now that's Emily Dibble, and they have just taken over the support systems. And so we have what I think is a really wonderful support system for faculty and students. We have drop-in labs, so students can drop in anytime. We also have online support, so students can have an online consultation with one of our full-time folks or one of our peer mentors who are part-timers, often students themselves. In terms of ePortfolio pedagogy, we were fairly clear that we wanted to take a laissez-faire approach initially. We wanted to set a requirement that all courses in general education had to have at least one signature assignment that was tied to our general education learning outcomes that students would put in their ePortfolio, and at least one reflection that would accompany that. And we encouraged faculty to go beyond that and identify multiple signature assignments and allow students to choose from them, and to weave reflection throughout the course, not just sort of at the end as a requirement for the ePortfolio. I think one of the mistakes I made early, was not emphasizing professional development around pedagogy enough. I was really concerned that faculty and students get the technology of the ePortfolio, and we emphasized that, and we didn't think about the pedagogy and folio thinking and reflective pedagogy. So we've adjusted. We offer all sorts of both technical and pedagogical professional development. In terms of assessment, again, that was one of the reasons we started ePortfolio, and we were anxious to get involved in assessment, but of course we had to wait for a couple of years so that we had students who were graduating with full portfolios. But once we got to that situation, we used ePortfolio to assess our general education program, and very quickly realized that ePortfolio was giving us a really unique and rich look at how students were actually experiencing our general education program. You kind of think you know how students experience your program, but until you see their portfolios and their reflections about what they're doing, you're kind of getting an incomplete picture until you get to that point. But we started with assessment. We've been revising our assessment every year and trying to slowly but surely improve it. We've gone from being docked by our accreditor for lack of assessment in Gen Ed to being commended by our assessor or accreditor for the way we assess our general education with ePortfolio. So we're feeling very good along those lines. But again, this year we're launching into another new initiative to improve our assessment of Gen Ed through ePortfolios. Our primary sort of synergistic partner for ePortfolio is our General Education Committee, which is a faculty-led committee that governs the general education program. And I've been involved with that committee for pretty much the entire time I've been at Salt Lake Community College, either as a faculty or as an administrator. And ePortfolio has revolutionized the way we think about general education governance. Courses come up for review every 5 years in that committee. And I remember the sort of bad old days when it was just a kind of a silly hoop that departments had to jump through that didn't have much meaning. Now, when courses come up for review, we're having meaningful conversations about student reflection, about signature assignments, about how we align assignments to learning outcomes. And so it's really revolutionized. And so that the relationship and that synergy has been very, very helpful for us. And then lastly, I want to mention also in terms of leadership, initially, in the first couple of years, if I or the ePortfolio coordinator or both had got hit by a bus, you could pretty much say that the ePortfolio initiative probably would have dried up and gone away fairly quickly after that. Now I'm out of the day-to-day operation of the ePortfolio, and I can sort of steer it from a high level from the provost's office. And I have Emily and Victoria as full-time staff, and then about 6 or 7 part-time peer mentors. We have labs set up around our major campuses. We're integrated into the general education program. The ePortfolio platform is now also used for all of our faculty rank and tenure portfolios, the very same platform. So I feel confident, knock, knock, that if I got hit by a bus or if something happened to Emily or Victoria, that the college has embraced ePortfolio. We've changed the culture enough so that it would continue. So that's the story from Salt Lake Community College. Are there any questions? Well, I'll skip questions for now. The next thing I wanted to go to is a sharing and feedback, and make sure that we have enough time for this. And we're not going to break out into breakout rooms, but think about these topics, and I'll put the topics in the chat after I finish sharing my screen. But as you think about these topics, let's have an all group kind of conversation. You can raise your Zoom hand and do one of the following. Tell us how you are addressing a particular one of these key topics as you move from pilot to scale. And maybe we can benefit from your experience. Maybe you could impose an intractable problem that you're having related to one of these key topics. And let's see if we can crowdsource a solution for you. Or if you could ask the group for advice or clarification on one of these key topics and how you might address it in your institutional context. So there's the key topics that we think are important to address when you're moving from pilot to scale. And if you could raise your Zoom hand, first of all, if you have any questions for me in the story that I told, or if you want to address a particular key topic that you think is important in your context, because I guarantee you it'll be important in someone else's context as well. And when you raise your hand, it'll come up, you'll be highlighted for me, and I'll be able to call on you. And I know people are not shy in this group, so. I see Leanne. Can you also tell us, Leanne, what institution you're from?
Yeah. Hi, David. Thank you for your presentation. I am with Kwantlen Polytechnic University in British Columbia, Canada. And we've been using ePortfolios for about 10 years, but have changed platforms last year. So I'd be interested in hearing about a little bit more about what data you collected. We put together a pretty robust survey towards the end of our second semester of our slow launch. We went enterprise-wide and had a very poor response rate to that. Now that might be some fatigue from the pandemic, but I'd be interested to hear what folks are collecting for data and what is most meaningful from that lens.
I have an answer to that. Does someone else want to chime in first? What kind of data are you collecting as you move from pilot to scale? We were collecting sort of basic things like numbers of e-portfolios created by students to gauge adoption. That was difficult though, because we were using a variety of free platforms initially. Now it's easy because we have a commercial platform that we're using. So we have a pretty good idea of the pulse, of usage. We were collecting assessment data, obviously. Several years after we started the initiative, we did a survey of faculty. We've done 2 of those surveys. The most recent one was part of our program review, but we surveyed faculty in terms of their understanding of how ePortfolio was being used in our general education program, the impact that they thought it was having on students, on student intentionality and things like that. And then we also asked open-ended questions of the faculty of what they thought was going well and what they would improve about the implementation. And so we've done 2 of those surveys in our time since we started in 2010. And then we've done a program review just last year, just before the pandemic. We did a program review, had several focus groups of students, faculty, staff, administrators about the ePortfolio. So we've collected a fair amount of different kinds of data on our ePortfolio initiative. Does that answer your question, Leanne?
Yeah, a little bit. I think we're on the right track with what we're asking. We just I think didn't get the uptake this year, but as we broaden to some real targeted implementation this year, I think that we may have some shift there.
Yeah. Anyone else with data collection questions or issues?
Yeah, welcome. Thank you for your presentation. I really appreciate it. I guess the thing that I would kind of add here is a question a little bit regarded to thinking through some of the dynamics for data collection as it regards implementation. So we're in the very kind of beginning stages of our implementation and are thinking through, making sure we don't miss any opportunities in terms of the data collection in regards to the progress that we are in fact making. Some of the obvious kind of data collection would be, rates of implementation. So numbers of faculty who report using ePortfolios throughout the curriculum or throughout the process of implementation. And so, ultimately, if we want these ePortfolios to be useful to faculty, then rates and numbers are going to be really important. But I'm also kind of thinking through if there are other quantitative measures that might be useful, as well as qualitative measures that might be appropriate. And I'm kind of trying to think through like faculty rates of satisfaction, not rates of satisfaction, I guess maybe that's quantitative. But in terms of like what faculty seem to be seeing or getting out of their ePortfolio use that may not be purely quantitative. And I guess I'm trying to think through that because there's a suspicion I have, I don't know if my colleagues here shared or not, but there's a suspicion I have that maybe the rates of implementation in terms of numbers may not grow very fast. And it's going to be more about kind of the qualitative impact that we get in certain areas rather than the numbers that might feel and look and seem a little better in terms of our implementation. But I'd like to kind of put that to the crowd and to see from our experience and collective wisdom what that might look like and what may kind of serve us best in regards to building momentum on our campus for our particular implementation.
Yeah, that's a great question. Does anyone have a response for Ryan about qualitative data that you could collect? Yeah, Leanne.
So I was in a session yesterday where we talked about sort of impact and long-term impact. And of course, like you said, Ryan, that takes time to get to, right? That's like talking to alumni. It's talking to students who've used them year over year and have opportunities to develop. And faculty at the beginning, depending on where they are in terms of sort of the early adoption, innovation curve there, are either coming in with some particular beliefs about what they expect they're going to see, or then later into your journey, you start to get the folks who were maybe sitting on the fence a little while longer and wanted. So I actually think that in that case, the qualitative helps move us along, perhaps in a more meaningful way than the quantitative numbers do. But I think that our administrators, I know mine, like to see the combination, right? They like to see that the tool that they spent X amount of dollars on, because I took my institution from an open source free tool to a enterprise wide costly tool that is very powerful and is going to do wonderful things for us, but that takes patience, right? And so I think the testimonials and getting people to be willing to showcase work, samples of portfolios and so on, is really helpful to moving faculty along. And I think, you can even like when we started, I showed people portfolios from other institutions too, right? So peruse the websites. I would extend the same offer as David. Whatever you see for ideas or resources on KPU's site, we are Creative Commons advocates, so help yourself, steal ideas, and I think the qualitative really matters at the beginning.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of the things that occurred to me as you were talking is maybe to have kind of department level communities of practice that would meet regularly and exchange how things are going, and some as good examples as well as bad examples of things that are working and things that are not working, particularly early on in an implementation. That can surface alleys that you don't want to go down early, so you can avoid those. Allie had some feedback.
Yes, so you took the words right out of my mouth, David. I was going to say community of practice for this exact reason. So not necessarily with just the end goal being for data collection, but in the early stages, especially from my context at Carleton University, we had a community of practice about once a semester at the end of the semester when instructors had experience to share. And for me, who was providing primarily the support to those instructors, it was really helpful for me to hear the things that I spoke with them at the start of the term. How did that actually work out in practice? So it was a feedback loop for me informally. It also helped me be able to identify who are some champions, who are some folks that I may approach to do a panel session about ePortfolios because things have been working out really well for them, who are folks who we may bring into a meeting with the provost to share what their experience has been. So I really, and then also on the flip side, I mean, I'm talking about what was good for me, but it was great because faculty were supporting one another. They had way better insights than the suggestions that I was sharing with them at the start of the term. So I really encourage the use of a community of practice, especially at the early stages, because that's when they really need the support from one another.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I would also add that as you're moving from pilot to scale, presumably you had X number of folks involved in the pilot, and they are often kind of enthusiastic early adopter people. And in our case, they were spread out across the disciplines in general education. So we had math and we had science and we had social science and humanities. And they became resources for folks who were then having to start using ePortfolios once we went to scale. And they had already kind of worked out the kinks in their own individual practice. Let me ask about ePortfolio pedagogy. How are you conceptualizing the use of ePortfolio in your particular instance? And maybe tie that to professional development. How are you going to convey to the users of ePortfolio in terms of faculty the pedagogical approach that you are encouraging? Are you taking a laissez-faire approach? Do you have certain stipulations that you, like a common denominator kinds of practices that you're encouraging?
Are you talking to me or are you talking to everybody?
I'm talking to everyone, sorry.
Yeah, good, just wanted to make sure.
Well, I can share for KPU that we started with sort of a laissez-faire, but we've targeted some particular groups. So we have some particular areas that already collect and curate a lot of evidence of learning that wasn't getting placed anywhere and wasn't necessarily being reflected on in a systematic kind of way. We also have areas where they do lots of reflection, but it's, a Word document to Moodle, which no one ever looks at ever again, right? And so trying to identify some of the practices that were already occurring in particular departments and programs that lend themselves well to folio thinking was part of our pedagogical strategy. And then we do have a couple of areas where they are taking a program level look at their outcomes. Our BA framework has put an ePortfolio outcome in their program outcomes. So that is forcing every department in the Faculty of Arts to consider where their signature assignments will be. And so we'll be helping them with that this year. And then there'll be some significant role from there. So I guess kind of a combination, a little bit laissez-faire, but also really saying like, tell me what, it seems like your program might do this. Let me show you how that could look here. And Lisa posted in the chat there a sample of some ePortfolios from a showcase week competition we did from PD this year.
Super, thank you, Lisa. Yeah, I take that advice to heart, and we started with a laissez-faire approach as well. But let me tell you about an important feedback loop. When you have support labs where students can drop in and get assistance, that becomes an informal feedback loop. So early on, students will come in for typically technical reasons, like I don't know how to start my ePortfolio, or I don't know how to upload an assignment, that sort of thing. But while you're working with a student, you might ask them, tell me about the signature assignment that your instructor in biology is asking you to do, or how were you introduced to reflection? And we were discovering things like a lot of faculty were uncomfortable with the notion of reflection, and they were simply asking students, "Hey, put your assignment in here and reflect on it, period." Or tell me what you liked about this course, which is not really the kind of reflection that we were hoping for. So after we got enough, experience with that, of kind of getting that kind of ad hoc information from interacting with students, we were able to then put out guidance to faculty and say, technically you can ask students to reflect on anything you want, but here are some categories of things you might think about, like connecting this class to another class students took, or asking students to reflect on the process they went through in creating that assignment and so forth, to really help integrate Gen Ed, which is what we were hoping for. And that's another back channel set of information. Andrew, you have a question or a comment. Andrew Harver.
Yeah, thank you. So I can share a little bit what we've been able to make some headway on. So a number of years ago, I introduced ePortfolios into our undergraduate public health program, which is a pretty small group of students, about 50 a year. So it's an upper division major. We have about 100 students, in the program at any one time. And my goal has always been, at least at a minimum, to try to bookend introduction of the ePortfolio with one of the early courses in the major, and then follow that up during capstone. So what happened, and David, you'll appreciate this, I had the great pleasure and high privilege of writing a new degree program in health systems management. We had to figure out what to do with students who weren't being admitted into our professional health related programs. And because I, to use a phrase, wrote the damn program, I was able to mandate, as part of the course descriptions, this bookend approach of having students develop an ePortfolio in one of the introductory courses, and then follow that up with capstone. And then I took, and this is a real point of tension, right, which everybody has experienced, I took a laissez-faire approach. I just sort of sat back and decided to see what was going to happen. And fortunately, there were a couple of faculty who were part of that program who began to adopt the idea that ePortfolios are good for student success. And so I've been able to sort of emphasize not so much that assessment or larger outcomes of the ePortfolio pedagogy, but I've tried to twist it a little bit in terms of the value for the student. And the word I like better than identity is branding. So I've been able to kind of position, I think, the ePortfolio into one of our larger undergraduate degree programs, about 1,000 students now, not nearly the scale of, at an institutional level, but encouraging faculty to think about the contributions of reflection in the development of student workforce preparedness has got us a little traction. And so wasn't I surprised at the end of the semester when I read the dean's strategic plan for her next year is now to incorporate ePortfolios throughout the college. So we're going to see where this goes now. And there's a real opportunity here, which is why I've been interested in the success at your institution and others of, scaling this up. So that's what I had to say about that. But I would like you to come back eventually. I know there's some other issues on the table here. I would like to come back to a consistent problem, which is the adoption of a common platform, right? I mean, I want to have faculty with as many degrees of freedom as possible, but on the other hand, we're already having students, they do this ePortfolio in Gen Ed, and then they do this ePortfolio in maybe this other course, and then they come to our program, and now they got to do another ePortfolio. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, in your experience, about how you've been able to create a more cohesive or some continuity in the implementation of the ePortfolio program that is threaded, throughout the student experience at a single institution, right? So, yeah. For example, in your Gen Ed program, is every faculty ready to help a student get started, or is there a single course where the ePortfolio is rolled out so that there is some, not standardization, but a common implementation where the expectations then are sort of carried through not only the Gen Ed program, but now in these other instances that you shared?
Yeah, so you have several key points that you've made there. The first thing you were talking about aligns almost exactly with what Tracy was mentioning in the chat, which is to align the ePortfolio initiative to the institutional strategic plan. Well, in your case, it was a departmental and then school alignment, and that's very valuable. And so we've done the same kind of thing. In terms of platforms, that's always a tough issue. We started out with, primarily because of budget reasons, free platforms and allowed students to pick which ones they wanted to use. It gave students a lot of agency, and we like that, but it creates all kinds of other support headaches. And we have one platform now, that we use for all of our academic programs, as well as for faculty rank and tenure portfolios. The difficulty with, it solves a lot of issues. The difficulty with it is that, there are always people and departments who say, well, this isn't the best platform for our particular application. And, that's difficult to address. So it's certainly better than to have each department picking its own platform. And then when students are taking a course here or there, they have to learn a new platform. It's just very difficult along those lines. I'm going to move to Jillian. She's had her hand up. Thank you, Andrew.
Hi, thank you. Sorry, I don't know if this was addressed earlier because I came in about 10 minutes late, but I was just curious about the assessment process. Are you using this as capstone only, or is there formative and summative assessment throughout with the signature assignment?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in a case like Andrew was mentioning, it sounds like they're using it in the capstone experience in those health programs. in our general education program, one of my predecessors in my administrative role tried to get a kind of an introductory and a capstone experience in our general education program, but she couldn't expand the program in terms of credits. So she had to get the credits from somewhere, which raised everyone's defenses, and she had to give up on that prospect. So we don't have that situation in our implementation. So we have mentally kind of conceptualized our general education e-portfolio as a capstone in progress. That is, students are essentially knitting together their general education experience as they take each course and as they add to their portfolio. But I kind of envy folks that do have a capstone situation, because I think e-portfolios are ideal for that situation.
Yeah, I would think a blend would be ideal. So assessing the learning journey, either formatively or summatively, and then having that capstone at the end. I think that would be kind of ideal.
Yeah, I think if I was responsible for a 4-year program, I would actually ask students to do 2 portfolios. One would be a developmental, where they're sort of keeping track of their growth in that discipline and its practices over time. And then kind of a showcase / capstone portfolio that could be used to demonstrate their attainment of the learning outcomes of the program, could be used for transfer to graduate programs or for hunting for a job. That to me might be a nice mix, is to have kind of a developmental portfolio as well as a showcase one.
Thank you.
Someone had the question in the chat about the business case and the resources that a scaled implementation would draw on. And that's an important consideration. I know that fully supporting an e-portfolio initiative, once you think about the platform that you might adopt, support personnel, office space, things like that, it's not insignificant. And I acknowledge that. But the way I think about it is, in terms of the impact on students, in our case, we spend far less on our e-portfolio platform than I know the institution spends on other technology solutions that have a far narrower impact. That are the platforms that are doing specific things around campus that we spend much more money on. And so it's been fairly easy for me to make the case kind of in the budget wars at our institution to support e-portfolio because of the impact. I mean, essentially every student is being impacted positively in my estimation by e-portfolio, and now all faculty are using it for rank and tenures. And that actually, if you can pull that off, I would encourage it, because even 7 years after we started with e-portfolio with students, when we started to make the transition to faculty using portfolios for their rank and tenure, the doubters among faculty, many of them were won over when they had to make their case for rank and tenure through an e-portfolio. The kind of the light went on for them of how powerful a tool it is. Yes, Andrew.
Yeah, I think my question about the business case is as much a question about kind of the cost benefit analysis of it, as much as what resources are needed up front before we see those benefits. Because right now I'm kind of the one-man shop running e-portfolio implementation within an academic department. Yeah. And the e-portfolio component involving faculty development and involving assignment design and kind of some instructional design pieces, the platform administration makes up like maybe 10% of my job. And if we're also in a unique moment in my department because we're rolling out a new curriculum and have been in the process of designing it for the last 2 years. And just the amount of faculty development needed to get ePortfolio embedded in that whole new curriculum exceeded the available time that I had to do it.
Sure.
And the amount of instructional design support also kind of exceeds that. And so if I could just do ePortfolio things, then we would have ePortfolio embedded across our whole curriculum as soon as the new curriculum is rolled out. And so I'm just wondering, kind of, is there an ideal ratio that anybody's found in terms of like number of people to number of students, or number of people to number of courses? Is kind of one person per department, or a small team centrally in a college? Kind of what's that ratio look like in successful transitions to scale from pilot?
Yeah, that's an excellent one of those intractable problem questions. It's almost like a catch-22 situation, right? How can you demonstrate the efficacy of ePortfolio until you have resources, and they won't give you resources until they know it's efficacious. And I would say, I mean, my answer to that is kind of the snowball approach. I think you have the advantage of working in a discrete department, and then you need to think about how to present the benefit of ePortfolio on the scale that you're currently operating at. And then if you can do that, given the resources and the time limitations that it's obvious that you have, after you can demonstrate that, what piece of snow can you put on that snowball, right? What's the next logical step to add to that? Is it more students in a different part of the program? Is it a different program that can be added? And then if you can get the department or the school to say, yeah, we want to expand this, then you've got the automatic case to make that, well, then we need more resources. And you've got to be persistent and patient. That's the only thing I can say is keep asking. All they can say is no. Anybody else have other ideas for Andrew's dilemma? I'm sure many people are facing a similar dilemma. So a few more minutes. I know Tracy says that we want to end about 5 minutes till to give people time to get to their next session. How do you get over this catch-22 of building an implementation?
So David, I know Canada and the US kind of operate differently in some of these contexts in terms of how our teaching and learning centers work, but we have what we call an education consultant approach, where faculty get time released from their teaching load to do work for our department related to a specific initiative.
Yeah.
And so while we started with just our core staffing last year, I was able to add a time release for ePortfolio advancement going into this next year. And my budget ask will then have a permanent full-time FTE for an ePortfolio strategist to sort of take the reins and, as we continue to grow. So maybe time releases might be a strategy for folks to bring in some of those champions and let them really invest and share their enthusiasm with other people and help to grow the program that way.
That's a great suggestion, Leanne. Time releases for faculty and staff. Another one I would suggest is that there are always people at large institutions who have access to discretionary funds. They tend to be, at the dean level, the associate provost level, the provost level, but people who have undedicated pots of money that you could convince them to dedicate temporarily this year and next year, let's say, to kind of proof of concept of why your initiative should be expanded. And then if you can get that, then maybe you can tap into some base budget going forward. Well, it looks like we are up against time. Thank you so much for your participation. This has been a great conversation, and I look forward to seeing you in other sessions at ABLE.
Thanks so much for this great session, David. I think really helpful for even those of us who've been in it for a long time. So really appreciate everyone's input and your session.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.